You won't believe what happened when Jaleel White, the actor best known as Steve Urkel from Family Matters, sat down for a psychic reading. What started as a normal session quickly turned into something completely unexpected. He was there with Tyler Henry, the famous Hollywood medium, just hoping to connect with the past. But what happened next left him completely shaken. At first, it seemed like just another reading, but then Henry began mentioning things that sent chills down White's spine. This is where it gets interesting. Henry claimed he could see certain letters, E, L, L, and E. White's expression changed instantly. His eyes widened and his voice turned serious. He immediately asked, "Did you Google this before?" The room suddenly felt heavy. Henry, caught off guard, insisted that he had done no prior research. But White wasn't convinced. He was skeptical, yet at the same time, something inside him knew this was different. Then came the craziest part. As the session continued, Henry described a presence, a woman with a warm energy, someone deeply connected to White's past. White's breathing became unsteady. He was trying to keep himself together, but it was clear he already had a name in mind. And then the moment came. Henry said something that completely broke White's composure. He mentioned the word September. White's heart skipped a beat. His emotions started to overflow, and that's when he finally said it out loud. "You're talking about Michelle Thomas." The name alone was enough to bring back everything. Memories of laughter, long days on the set of Family Matters, inside jokes, and their close friendship. It all came rushing back like a flood. But here's where the story takes an even deeper turn. Michelle Thomas wasn't just a co-star to White. She was much more than that. She played Myra Monkhouse, Steve Urkel's quirky, love-struck girlfriend on the show. But off-screen, she was a dear friend, someone White deeply cared about. Michelle was a light in everyone's life, beautiful, talented, and full of joy. But destiny took an unexpected turn. In 1997, at just 29 years old, she was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of stomach cancer. The news was shocking. She was young, healthy, and had so much ahead of her. But this disease didn't care. It spread fast, and before anyone knew it, her life changed forever. Now, sitting in front of Tyler Henry, all of these painful memories came back to White. He tried to hold it in, but his voice cracked. "She was my co-star, my family," he said, his emotions pouring out. The pain was still fresh even after all these years. He remembered how quickly her health declined, how helpless everyone felt watching her suffer. But the most heartbreaking part, she never lost her spirit. Even in her worst days, Michelle remained the same kind-hearted, loving person she had always been. This session was no longer just about a psychic reading. It was about reliving a tragic loss that had stayed with White for decades. But what Henry revealed next was something no one expected, and that's where things get even more shocking. But here's the shocking part. Just when White thought he had heard everything, Henry said something that made him completely freeze. He wasn't just talking about Michelle in general. He mentioned a specific moment, a time of deep sadness, a hospital room, a final goodbye. White's hands clenched together, his eyes filled with tears. This was getting too real. He hadn't spoken about this memory in years, yet here it was, being laid out in front of him like an open book. Michelle's final days were something that haunted him. She had always been full of life, always smiling, always bringing joy to everyone around her. But when the cancer took over, everything changed so fast. White had visited her in the hospital, hoping to see the same energetic, happy Michelle he had known for years. But instead, he found someone who was barely holding on. She was weak, her body frail, but her eyes still had that warmth, the same warmth he had seen every day on set. Seeing her like that broke him. He had never felt so helpless in his life. He wanted to say so much, to tell her how much she meant to him, but no words felt enough. And before he knew it, time ran out. She was gone, just like that. Henry, still channeling his vision, described something even stranger. He said Michelle's energy felt peaceful, as if she wanted White to know she was okay. White let out a deep breath. He wasn't sure what to think. Could this really be Michelle reaching out? Or was it just a coincidence? But then Henry said something that made the room go completely silent. She wants you to know she never blamed you. White's entire body stiffened. Blamed him? For what? A wave of guilt washed over him. Was Michelle sending him a message? Was there something he had carried all these years without realizing it? The emotions became too much to handle. White leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was personal. He had spent so long trying to move forward, trying to keep Michelle's memory alive in a positive way. But deep down, there was something he had never admitted to himself: regret. He regretted not spending more time with her when she was sick. He regretted not telling her how much she truly meant to him. And now, hearing these words from Henry, it all hit him at once. But this is where it gets interesting. Henry continued, saying Michelle's spirit wasn't just there to bring sadness. She wanted to remind White of something important, something about a specific date. White's eyes narrowed. He had no idea what Henry was talking about. But then Henry said it: September 23rd. White's jaw dropped. That was Michelle's birthday. How could he possibly know that? This wasn't a common fact. It wasn't something someone could just guess. And in that moment, White felt something he couldn't explain. For years, he had carried the pain of losing Michelle. But now, sitting in that chair, hearing Henry speak, he felt something shift. It was almost as if, for the first time in decades, she was right there with him. Was it real? Was it just an illusion? White didn't know. But one thing was certain: this was a moment he would never forget. And just when he thought the emotions couldn't get any stronger, Henry revealed something even more shocking, something that completely changed the way White saw everything. But here's where it gets even crazier. Just when White thought he had processed everything, Henry dropped another revelation that left him speechless. He mentioned music. At first, White didn't understand. Music? What did that have to do with Michelle? But then it hit him. Michelle Thomas wasn't just an actress. She was the daughter of Dennis Thomas, the legendary jazz musician from Kool and the Gang. Music had always been a huge part of her life. Henry described an image: Michelle surrounded by music, a song playing that meant something special. White's breathing grew heavier. He knew exactly what Henry was talking about. In Michelle's final days, music was one of the only things that brought her comfort. Even when she was too weak to talk, she would close her eyes and listen. White remembered visiting her in the hospital, watching as a soft melody played in the background. He didn't know it then, but that moment would stay with him forever. He had never spoken about this publicly. How could Henry possibly know? The room fell completely silent. White's face showed every emotion: shock, sadness, disbelief. This was getting too real. But this is where it gets even more heartbreaking. Henry, still locked into his vision, said Michelle wanted White to know something about the last time they spoke. White tensed up. His mind raced back to that final conversation. It wasn't long, just a few words exchanged in the hospital, but it was something that had stayed with him ever since. He remembered how she looked at him, how she tried to smile, even though she was in pain. And then she said something so simple yet so powerful: take care of yourself. At the time, he didn't think much of it. He thought they'd have more time. But now, looking back, he realized she knew. She knew she didn't have much longer. And this is where the craziest part happened. Henry, still channeling Michelle's energy, said, she wants you to stop carrying the guilt. White's entire body tensed. Guilt? That word hit him hard. He had spent years wondering if he had done enough, if he had been there for her the way he should have, if he had told her everything he needed to before it was too late. And now Henry was saying Michelle never wanted him to feel that way. White couldn't hold back his emotions any longer. He wiped his face, trying to compose himself. This session had turned into something much deeper than he ever expected. But here's where it gets even more unbelievable. Henry said Michelle wasn't just sending a message for White, she was sending a sign, something White would recognize, a way to let him know she was still around. White, still emotional, asked what the sign was. Henry paused for a moment, then said something that completely floored him. A butterfly. White's head shot up, his eyes widened. He didn't know what to say. Because here's what no one else knew. Michelle had always loved butterflies. It was something small, something personal, but it was real. And in that moment, White felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of peace. Maybe, just maybe, Michelle really was still with him in some way. Maybe this wasn't just a random session. Maybe this was something more. But just when White thought the emotions couldn't go any deeper, Henry said something that completely changed everything. Something about a secret that Michelle had never shared with him before. And what Henry revealed next, that's what truly left White in shock. But here's where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. Just when White thought he had heard everything, Henry revealed something that completely changed the way he saw Michelle's passing. He mentioned a secret, something Michelle had never told White while she was alive. White leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but he couldn't turn away now. Henry took a deep breath and said, "She didn't want you to see her in pain." White froze. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The weight of those words hit him like a ton of bricks. He thought back to the final weeks of Michelle's life. She had stopped returning some calls. She had asked friends to visit her less often. At the time, he didn't question it. He thought she just needed rest. But now, hearing this, it all made sense. She had been protecting him. And then Henry added something even more heartbreaking. She thought if you saw her that way, it would change the way you remembered her. White's face dropped. That was exactly what had happened. For years, every time he thought of Michelle, the image of her in that hospital bed would push its way to the front of his mind. No matter how much he tried to remember the happy times, the laughter, the fun on set, the way she used to make everyone smile, his brain always went back to that one painful moment. Now, Henry was telling him that Michelle knew this would happen. She had tried to shield him from it, but in the end, he had carried the pain anyway. But here's the part that changed everything. Henry said Michelle wanted him to finally let go. Not of her memory, but of the sadness, of the guilt, of the regret. She wanted him to celebrate her life, not mourn it forever. White wiped his eyes, taking deep breaths, trying to steady himself. He had spent so many years feeling like he had lost a piece of himself when Michelle passed. But now, for the first time in decades, he felt something different. He felt peace. And then, in one final eerie moment, Henry looked at White and said, "She's always been with you, and she always will be." White closed his eyes and nodded. He didn't know if he truly believed in psychics or spirits, but he knew one thing for sure. This experience had changed him. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was just a strange coincidence. But either way, he felt closer to Michelle than he had in years. After the session, White took to social media, still trying to process what had just happened. He tweeted, "I don't know what to say. That was unbelievable. Michelle, you are missed every single day." Fans flooded the comments, sharing their own memories of Michelle and the impact she had left behind. Even after all these years, Michelle Thomas remains a beloved figure in television history. Her role as Myra Monkhouse is still cherished by Family Matters fans, and her presence in The Cosby Show is remembered with warmth. But more than that, those who knew her personally still speak of her kindness, her light, and the joy she brought into every room. For Jaleel White, this experience wasn't just about a psychic reading. It was about finding closure. It was about realizing that Michelle's memory wasn't something to grieve. It was something to cherish, and maybe, just maybe, she had never really left at all.